Thank you for turning into Serves You Right. My name is Andrew, and today we're talking to Dr. Henry Roediger, a gentleman who has fundamentally changed the way thousands, and I mean thousands of people have approached learning and memory, including me. Dr. Henry Roediger is a cognitive psychologist and co-author of the groundbreaking book, Make It Stick. Working with Mark McDaniel and Peter Brown, he helped bring decades of psychological research into the practical day-to-day world of people that need to memorize and learn tons of things, like sommeliers working in restaurants. And that's where I found his work. Dr. Roediger's research focuses on things like how to learn, how to effectively remember, and what it is to actually know a thing and remember a thing. There's a lot here, a lot to unpack. If you've ever found yourself reading, rereading, highlighting, and then wondering why this information's not going to stick, this episode's for you. So hold on, and here we go. I am a huge fan of Make It Stick. So I did want to ask, how did that project come about? And maybe just tell the listener a little bit about you and the work you've done. So
Sure. The project came about, Mark McDaniel and I are colleagues here. We're second and third authors of the book. And we had been doing research together along with Kathleen McDermott and a few other people for many years on applying cognitive psychology to education, supported by the James S. McDonald Foundation here in St. Louis. He founded McDonnell Aircraft, which became McDonnell Douglas, which became Boeing. And so that's where the funding came from, a very generous foundation supporting educational research. And so Mark and I had been making what we thought were really interesting discoveries along with our colleagues. And Mark kept telling me we ought to write a book about it. And I kept telling Mark, if you and I write a book about it, it might be in academies and people might not understand what we were saying. You know, it might not have as wide an impact as we would like it to, but we need is a professional writer. And so we thought about that, and it occurred to me I have a professional writer in my family. Peter Brown is my brother-in-law. My sister's Ellen Brown. And so he had written both fiction and nonfiction work, and he spent his life in business. Very different background. He'd been an English major, didn't know much about psychology. And so I approached him, and he seemed wary of the idea because it was kind of outside his wheelhouse. But we kept talking, and finally he agreed that he would do it. And so he became a partner in this, and we met in San Diego after a meeting, a professional meeting. And then we sat there for 2 days and kind of mapped out a first, not draft, but at least organizational chart of the book. And then we fleshed it out, and then we began work in earnest. In the meantime, I was invited to Harvard to give a talk for a new institute they had in improving undergraduate education. And in the audience happened to be an editor from Harvard University Press. And she came up and asked afterwards. I gave a 15-minute 20-minute talk on my work, and she came up and said, "That's really interesting. Have you ever thought about writing a book about it?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, we have. We hadn't made any progress at all. I'm thinking about getting a publisher yet." And so we began talks with her too, and sent her our outline, and she had some really good comments on it. And so we eventually signed with Harvard University Press for the book. So that's, and then we began writing in earnest. That Mark and I would try to kind of draft out summary points and things that we wanted to include. Peter would interview people and find stories that were appropriate for the different chapters. And so it was a joint effort. I mean, he wrote drafts. Sometimes he was a little exuberant and made claims that were a little bit beyond what the data supported. So we had to rework. Anyway, everything was a collaboration among the three of us. We must have read each chapter 5 times apiece and worked on all the chapters together. So that's a long-winded way of telling you how the book began.
No, that's perfect. Yeah. And as far as I know, this is the first book kind of its kind. But just to give you a little of my background, I went through the world of wine sommelier certifications. So
Mhm.
working on my advanced sommelier certification, this is a podcast that's geared more to servers and bartenders in the restaurant industry.
Mhm.
But I looked for a while to kind of find something that could help me because it's such a sheer amount of information to memorize. And your book, when it came up a couple of years ago, was the first that I really found. I think there are a couple more now, but really is kind of
Yeah.
groundbreaking. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of books on improving memory from one point of view or another.
Hmm.
Some based more on science than others are. Most of them had to do with mnemonic devices. These techniques, we mention them in the book, but they're not a key part of our book, like they are in many other books. So, and these techniques are pretty hard to learn, and we wanted people to use low-hanging fruit. These are things anybody can use without going to a lot of training. Most of the things we suggest.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely the first book I found that actually, kind of made it okay to, you know, that disconnect between it doesn't feel like you're improving. Like learning isn't necessarily something that's pleasant. Like I forget how exactly that's put, but
Yeah,
it's when you struggle. Yeah,
desirable difficulties.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which was a big unlock for me because me, like most other people, I would just reread or highlight and do that sort of thing. But to
yeah.
really understand that even though I feel like I'm not progressing and I feel like I'm struggling, that is learning itself almost.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
how?
Well, we recommend, of course, one of the techniques we recommend in the book is using retrieval practice.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the key elements of the book, but it's also something, even though it seems obvious after you learn about it, it wasn't obvious to many people beforehand. So the idea of testing yourself because testing yourself, it not only improves what you know. I mean, when you recall it, or even if you fail to recall it, and you give yourself feedback on the right answer, um, then that improves you in several different ways. And also, when you test yourself, it lets you know what you don't know, what you need to work on. And so, a lot of people use the technique of spaced retrieval practice, where I don't know anything about wine. I mean, more than the average person does, so I can't use an example from your world. But you test yourself on something, say a particular. I was just in Italy for 2 weeks, so say you're trying to learn Tuscan wines. That's where I was spending my time, and there's so many different wines. They're just dizzying just to me. And so trying to learn those and remember those you should use retrieval practice for that instead of just studying them over and over and hoping you get it. And that way, if you use retrieval practice, you benefit yourself for the ones you know, and you indicate gaps in your knowledge for the ones you don't know. And so that tells you where you need to go back and study again.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I'm glad that you mentioned the space repetition. I was going to ask, with some of the products, I don't think it was ever mentioned. I don't know if it was around when the book came out, but like the Anki of the world, or like those automated space repetition things. Would you recommend using those sort of things, or?
Yeah, I think they are good. Most people send me new things they've developed all the time. In fact, I
Mhm.
owe people about three different people emails saying, because they said, here's my product, and would you please look at it? And I just don't have time to look at everything I get. But most of them are, if they've read the book, they build in a computer program that's very useful. So here would be one example, not going to pick on any particular product here. Some people charge money for them, others are available for free. Most people are now charging. But if you say test yourself, let's pick capitals of the state. So if you pick, say, Virginia, uh, and you say, what's the capital of Virginia? And you think and think, and finally you say Richmond, but with low confidence. It could be Alexandria, it could be something else. And so you've got low confidence. So if you've got low confidence, you should first look at the answer. It is Richmond. And then your confidence will go up. But you still, since you were low confidence, you should test yourself again, not too far in the future, say just a few days in the future. But if you got Richmond with very high confidence, like I'm from Virginia, so I use Richmond. I grew up in Virginia, and so I can put that one off far in the future because I know it. But other states I have more trouble with. I've memorized these repeatedly for classroom purposes mostly. But some, Idaho, I think is Boise, but that would be low confidence. And so you test yourself depending on how much confidence you have in your answer, and if, of course, you're right. Always give yourself feedback, even if you're pretty sure. I mean, sometimes there's these illusions people have when you ask Americans what's the capital of Australia. Most people will say Sydney, and mostly with pretty high confidence too, but that's not right. And so we have this high confidence erroneous response. So I think confidence is a big part of this, that you can test yourself further and further in the future the more confidence you are. But spatial retrieval practice is a really good way to remember this type of information. Medical students use it all the time. They're faced with the same kind of problem you are. The first couple of years of medical school are just massive amounts of memorization. You just have to know the muscles of the body and the bones of the body and the nervous system and all the other bodily systems. So you've just got a tremendous amount of information to learn, and many people use retrieval practice.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting kind of piece to pick at, the confidence of your knowledge of the element. Because if you look at the difference between, say, your wine studies and a medical student, I think wine studies, I may be unsure about the blending grapes in Sangiovese, the exact percentages, but medical students, if they're unsure, it could actually lead to pretty dire consequences. So
Right.
certainty and confidence becomes a much higher
Yep.
bar to cross. Yeah. I think the Capitals example was great too, because I can guarantee you with 100% accuracy that I have not thought of the capital of Virginia since I was probably 10 years old. And I still, in my head, thought, I think it's Richmond. So
Yeah.
it is amazing to see that the decay curve of that knowledge, at least, lasted me up till now. I wouldn't have bet money on it, but
Yeah.
it's stuck in there. Whatever they did in elementary school
Yeah.
carried on.
And you occasionally read it in the paper without noticing it, probably.
That's
Uh,
true. Yeah, that's true.
but you're not trying to remember it, of course.
No, there's no stock that I ever put in knowing that information.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in like memory and learning originally?
Well, I had uh, just, I think, growing up and going to school, and I, just, and some people retaining information seemingly easily and well, and other people not being able to do that so easily and well. And I wondered, is it the strategies people use to remember, or is it their innate ability, their intelligence, whatever that nebulous concept means? And we kind of all know what it means, but we from school, but that kind of verbal intelligence, at least verbal mathematical intelligence that we need in school. Um, so I somehow just got interested, and then when I got to college, I discovered there was a whole field that studies this kind of thing. So I had personal experiences. I wondered why I could. My mother died when I was young, and I could discovered I could remember her. I could keep her events of our lives together by mentally thinking about them. And that would
Mhm.
today be called retrieval practice, but actually that's not why I started studying retrieval practice. So I just got interested in a very young age, and then just kept pursuing that interest.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
run out over baseball since I played an awful lot of baseball and I never got much better after, in high school I played all 4 years and don't think I was much better my senior year than I was my freshman year. So decided that probably wasn't a good future for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's those are long shots to say the least.
Yeah. No,
uh,
most people don't recognize it back then. I recognized it back then. Uh,
well, so just so I know, because I believe the lifestyle of a professor and the doctor, like, what does your kind of day to day job look like? What is it that you do, really?
Okay. Well, let's say now it's summer, so I'm mostly writing and doing research, and I'm
Mm.
also retiring June 30th. But to give you a typical day from my past life, uh, if I would typically get up, go to my office, if I have a class that day, which I usually do, I will spend time looking at my notes, updating them, creating, maybe looking at all my PowerPoint slides for that day and making sure that they're up to date and then dropping a few, maybe adding a few. And so I can preparing for classes as part of the day, then going in and actually teaching the class for typically an hour and 20 minutes.
Mm.
If it's depending on what days of the week I'm teaching, if it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, it's an hour and 20 minutes. If it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, it's 50 minutes a period. And so then I kind of decompress after teaching. It takes me a half hour or so. It gets you wound up when you teach, at least
Mm.
for me. You,
Well, you're on
you,
stage,
you're
essentially.
on,
Yeah,
exactly, yeah, you're on
yeah.
stage and uh, depending on the course I'm teaching, it can be a stage for many people or a stage if it's a graduate seminar, maybe 10 to 15 people.
Mhm.
So anyway, it takes me a while to cool down. So usually I'll just do email or something after that and kind of calm down. Then I'll have committee meetings during the day, depending on what committees I'm on that semester. I'll probably have meetings with my graduate students and office hours for my undergraduate students. And then the meetings with graduate students often go on for a while. Once a week, we have a lab meeting with my students, and we discuss either a paper somebody is working on, or maybe a paper that I'm reviewing, or whatever happens to be the topic of the day. And so the day goes by quickly, and I usually try to work out until late afternoons. And then often I work an hour or two in the evenings too. So that's a typical day, I would
Yeah.
say, when I was fully fully a professor, which I'm kind of phasing out of now.
Well, congratulations. That's a milestone. Yeah.
Okay.
Retirement coming soon. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Um, I did want to ask you before I forgot too. With all the new technologies that are coming out with the AI, now with the prevalence of cell phones, everyone's got one in their pockets. Do you think that there are any long term effects? Are there any effects on learning and memory that you've seen from that sort of shift in the technology and things available?
I think it's too early to say yet. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
moving target. It's so new still. AI, I think what um, my last time I taught a freshman seminar called Introduction to Memory Studies with a friend of mine, Jim Lurch, who was in the anthropology department, and I taught about individual memory, like like Make It Sick is about how we learn better, and topics like eyewitness memory and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And he would teach about collective memory, memory for us in groups, how, I we identify with all kinds of groups, from our family to our schools, to our sports teams, what have you. And so you can look at memory for all of those. Here I do research together. We tend to look at national memories, how people remember, say, the last election, how people remember World War II, that kind of thing. I mean,
Interesting. Interesting.
remember
Yeah.
them as in the collective sense that you and I didn't experience World War II, but we have memories of it that we picked up from school, from movies, from media. So, we have knowledge of and memories of and can tell, we can probably tell the story of World War II. But anyway, I won't go. I'm about to go down that rabbit hole, so I will pull back since that's not really what the conversation's about today.
No, no, no. I mean, yeah, that sounds fascinating. I was going to ask what you were going to and focusing on nowadays. So that's actually
Well,
perfect. Yeah.
two things. I'm hoping this summer to write up some papers that I haven't had a chance to write up while I was, full time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. I am with Mark McDaniel and Peter Brown. We're starting on a second book that we're going to call Make It Work, and it's basically how people have used Make It Stick, both individually, like you're doing. You discovered it somehow, and now you're using it in your courses. And then how institutions have used it. For example, the medical students at Harvard Medical School, their curriculum is now based on Make It Stick.
Mm.
And when we interviewed the dean of medicine at Harvard and two of his associate deans, I guess it was two summers ago now, and they showed us the slide deck that they use when they introduce new medical students and Make It Stick and slide to the picture of the cover, and they
Awesome.
highly recommend reading it. So that's one example that will be a chapter of the book, but and other medical schools doing not the same thing, but similar things. And so we're finding cases where people have used it because we often get these questions. Well, I read Make It Stick, but here I am. I'm, chair of the English department at my college. How do I use it for English in my
Mm.
setting? And well, we don't know their setting, but here's somebody who's figured it out. We actually don't have anything about English in the book, so I shouldn't have used that as an example. But we have many other topics, some in academia, some in the world of training. Every business has a training uh, routine, and often they have somebody who's in big corporations, somebody who leads training, and they're always interested in training people better. And
Mm.
so, if you've got a store, I'm on the scientific advisory board of several different companies, and they sometimes um, will use Make It Sick or principles from Make It Sick to help train their customers. I mean, I'm sorry, their salespeople. So,
Oh
for
yeah.
example, if you work for New Balance shoe stores, there are New Balance shoe stores everywhere. Turnover is very heavy. People don't necessarily want to make their career out of selling shoes.
Hmm.
And so people do it for a while and then move on to something else often. And so they have new training all the time. How do you learn all these shoes and their dimensions and what's best for people with flat feet and what's best for people for high arches and what's best for running, what's best for walking and so forth.
And actually, in our organization, we do a similar thing. So
Oh,
I,
good.
I'm a general manager by day of a steakhouse restaurant.
Mhm.
So our training, we space it out over 2 weeks, days on and off to just have that spaced repetition. They
Yep.
start with one big test of the food menu, and then every shift after that, we call it rapid fire quizzing. But we
Mhm.
just ask them random questions to make sure that they're still pulling that information, find where they're strong and weak, and then hit that for the night. But you know,
That's great.
yeah, just
Mark and Peter and I might want to interview you.
oh yeah, I'm available. You got my
Okay.
contacts.
Uh,
But no, it's yeah. I did want to ask, going back, and also I wanted to make sure I got that for sure. It's called "Make It Work."
well, that's the
Maybe
chance of
that's in the
title.
air.
I
Okay,
mean, Make It Stick was like not the title the authors had in mind, but the company
mm,
gets the final word on what the title is.
got
And
it. Yeah,
so anyway, I
but
like the title a lot, but it's not one I
mhm,
came up with. So Make It Work may or may not be the final title.
fair enough. Yeah.
Probably.
I did want to ask you before the end of today if you had the chance to go back and redo the book, make it stick. Is there anything you would have done differently, added in or taken out?
Um, that's an interesting question. I think everything we said, I mean, I have to go through the book page, but which I will do,
Sure.
page by page to really think. But there's no big
Mm,
omissions or errors in the book. I
yeah,
mean, there might be omissions. You can always add more and more stuff, but there's nothing major we would change. I think today.
that's true. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. You never
Yeah,
know.
no,
It's
that's a
like
good question.
page
I mean,
45.
the
Oh,
book's 11 years old now, but still selling very well.
yeah.
New
No, I
people
think
are finding it.
I think that's a testament to what you did there. Yeah. Besides the recall, and I'm trying to remember in my head going through it, spaced repetition. I forget the word for it. Where you mix in interleaving different
Interleaving and
practices.
mixing it
Yeah.
up. Yeah,
Uh,
interleaving, that's very important for certain types of information for sure,
yeah.
it's especially useful in mathematics learning because almost always mathematics is taught in a blocked fashion where you learn a problem and then
Hmm.
you do two of them so you can do that problem. Then you move on to the next problem, so forth and so on. But you always know what type of problem it is when you're solving it. You know the formula, so it's just applying it. But when you have a test, you've got say 10 different types of problems you've learned, and now you're getting them all mixed up. So a critical part of this is being able to recognize what type of problem is this so you can call up the right formula. Or sometimes a
Hmm.
teacher will give you, say, the 10 formulas on the side, but you've still got to pick, so you don't have to memorize those. You just still have to pick out the right one. And if you use block practice, you've never had practice at doing that because you always know what it is. But if you use mixed up practice where you're getting all different kinds of problems, it slows down learning. But you retain much better and you do much better on the test. So it's a perfect example. Interleaving is a perfect example of what Robert and Elizabeth Bjork called a desirable difficulty, where
Hmm.
learning is made more difficult by interleaving than by blocking, but you remember and retain much better and you solve problems on the test much better.
Yeah. It's almost like like that's the way that you learn discernment, maybe, or like judgment. Is that too going too far in saying that?
Um, Say what you mean
Well,
by
I'm trying to sort of summarize in a easy phrase your example of the mathematics students. You spend a week learning how to find the area of this shape and this shape and this shape, but if you don't mix in the different shapes, you won't have the judgment and test data pick
Yeah,
the right formula. Yeah.
yeah. This judgment or discrimination of what type of problem is it that I'm looking at.
I might even say it's almost like a way of, I think in the book, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but there's a really there's a quote I've loved for a long time, and I think about it when I'm teaching wine to the servers too, where it's something like the students think that the grammatical sentence construction is like what the answer is, whereas like you're not getting the whole thing. You're just becoming more fluent and more fluent with the
Yeah,
information as you go over it. But you're not really seeing the core of why the answer is the answer.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you read something repeatedly, you become quite fluent in your eyes going over the page. You think, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. But you may or may not have it. You don't know until you're tested. One thing I suggest in reading textbooks is that if students will just say, read a section of the book, often textbooks are laid out in sections in the chapters. So a section might be 2 pages. And, at the end of that section, just close your eyes or close the book and try to repeat to yourself in your own words what you just read, not repeat exactly what you read. You can't do that anyway, probably, but repeat to yourself, and that helps so much. It's your initial retrieval practice of that information, and just doing that is extraordinarily helpful. Just to give you an example, I had a friend who said, I never can remember movies. Come out and I'll watch it and I'll understood it. And then 2 weeks later, it'll come up in conversation when his wife and he were having dinner, and he would say, nothing comes back to me. And I said, well, after you've watched the movie, uh, yeah, I said, if you've already seen it with your wife, you can't tell her about it. She'll be bored. But what you can do is at least mentally tell it to yourself. Go over the movie like you would that section of the book and tell yourself, just think of the beginning, the middle, and then the end. And you'll have a scaffold on which to hang your memories later because you'll have practiced retrieval for the key parts of the movie. There's usually an introduction to the characters, then there's some critical turning point, and then there's some resolution to that at the end of the movie, good or bad. And so if you just do that, you'll remember the movie later. And he told me later on, yeah, that works pretty well. I
Now,
remember it now.
now that's a perfect example. This book is one of the reasons that I have told countless people that, learning and memory is not repeated exposure, it's repeated recall.
Yeah,
And if you don't recall it, you don't get it. And I
yeah,
think that it's your book. I think that this is where I first was introduced to the penny experiment,
yeah.
where like trying to figure out like picture, I forget how it is, but it's like picture a penny, or isn't there like a website with different
Yeah,
pennies?
there was a famous study that simply asked people to recognize a penny, and it gave all kinds of different orientations of Abraham Lincoln, different wordings. Anyway, uh, the very few people scored as a group above chance, but just barely. There were a couple of other pennies that looked almost like the real penny, and people often picked them instead of the real penny. And sometimes they just pick kind of wild things. Because we've never had, we've seen a penny. It's kind of like mere repetition. It's very fluent. You see a penny, you say, oh, that's what it is. Of course, now we're doing away with pennies, so that example won't work in 100 years, but right now it works.
Well,
And
I mean,
uh,
even something as simple as is the president facing left or right on any of our dollar bills, any of our
yeah,
anything.
yeah,
I wouldn't bet any large amount of money on that.
yeah, even who's on it.
Yeah, on some of them for sure.
Yeah,
Well, also, it, you know, Dr. Roediger, thank you so much for making the time today. I really appreciate it. that book has been a huge life sin for me. There's a large portion of my life where I would not have been able to remember any of this stuff that I had to be tested on without it. So I definitely recommend anyone listening, go get that book. Don't get worried. Recall, a little bit of difficulty will make a world of difference in learning. So,
And we've only talked about retrieval practice, but we discussed other aspects of memory in there besides retrieval practice.
for sure. But yeah, no, it's mean a world to me, and it was a pleasure to get a few moments of your time to talk to you today. And
Well, thank you.
yeah, good luck on retirement.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Omaha steaks are famous everywhere.
Yeah, got to come have one now that you're retired.
Yeah, I've never been to Omaha. If I get there, I will.
Yeah, most people just drive through, so it's yeah. Thank you again. If you enjoyed this, please leave a review, like, share. The more people that we can reach, the more people we can help, and the more people we can bring this message to, a message of hope and possibilities in the service industry. Everyone who listens, thank you. You are my people. Keep rocking on and have a great service. And please come back and listen again. We send out new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. How about that? All right, see you soon.